who's going to talk about after the Hack Day. Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, hello. Can you hear me? Is that all right? Okay, this talk was originally done last month at a conference I was at in Birmingham, which was basically a one-day conference and 2 days of hackathon. So it's probably more geared towards that sort of thing, but brought it along tonight, present it to you guys. So basically, after the Hack Day, it's the story of what happened to a project after it was developed at a Hack Day. So a little bit, who am I? Basically, freelance software developer, a bit of a geek, tinker, maker, worked in various industries over the years, cable TV many years ago, water, so I've been involved with sensors and instrumentation, this sort of thing, telecoms, ISPs, and more recently finance and loyalty type companies. Keen interest in beer, obviously drinking that now. Bit of 3D printing, and been trying to build a CNC cutter for the last, God knows, 2 years at least. Don't ask how it's going, Mark. Wrong way. Okay, when I was thinking about this talk, I had to think about what sort of hack days people go to, what sort of hack days that people run. So the one I was at, example, was with a conference. So you have a conference, hack day. Others, it could be a company with new hardware, new data. They want people to play with it, see what they can do with it, develop products for them. Some of them could be for a cause. There was one earlier in the year for floods, another one for, I can't remember what it was, sorry. But there are various ones for different causes. Sometimes research and development, internal company ones, if a company wants to do a hack day for their staff, see what comes out of it. Particular demographic groups, you could have hack days for students. I don't know if there is actually one for OAPs, silver surfers, whatever you want to call yourselves. And you've also got general hack days where people will just come along, bring whatever they've got, hack it, see what's there at the end of the day or the weekend. Excuse me. Wrong way. So why do people go to hack days? Prizes. They may be monetary prizes, they may be equipment. No. They want to learn new things. So if there's a company providing new APIs, they want to have a go, play with it. You've also got your free pizzas, coffee, possibly alcoholic beverages if they have those. Also, you want to have a challenge. If you want to try new things, maybe with the kudos, showing off your skills, your developer skills, and importantly, have fun. And one of the things I've learned from doing a few of these is some tips when I've been doing them. So basically, keeping a track of your code you're producing, encourage your people in your team to share all the code, publish it at the end of the weekend. Take photographs, because I was putting this together, looking through all the photographs I needed for this presentation, and only found one. So that was a lesson that I needed to take away from that particular day. This project talking about was the formation of this thing called the Oxford Flood Network. It was designed as a guerrilla sensor network with sort of community involvement. We wanted to get cheap river level monitoring sensors onto the rivers around Oxford, not just the Thames, but all the other streams that feed into it. Make the data available for other people to build apps, use that data for their own purposes, their own monitoring, and that. And the way it started out, there was a hack day last year, November time, so nearly a year ago. It was just a small hack day, sponsored by a single company called 2 Degrees. They were a sustainability, environmental type consultancy, so it was in their offices. About a dozen people turned up, various number of skill sets, and it basically started off a whiteboard, list of topics, list of things that people were interested in, they wanted to do, and one of them there was this Oxford Flood Network. And basically everybody put their hand up and says, we want to work on this project. So in the end, we had sensors, we had Raspberry Pis as gateways, we had back-end databases, front-end web applications, and mobile applications. So you could wave your hand above this sensor to simulate a change in river level, and it was showing up on the mobile phone, on your application. So it's basically a whole full-end solution developed in a day. What usually happens with sort of these hack days is you finish the day, you go on to the next day, back to work, back to doing whatever, and it just basically gets forgotten. The code sits there in GitHub, whatever, festering, nothing happens to it. But what we wanted to do with this is continue it on. And this was the first, since it's the only picture I've got of the what we developed at the hack day. And it was basically a sensor with a little wireless module and a display, and it's just telling you the distance. And that distance there is from the ultrasonic sensor up to the ceiling. And that was the sensor that was developed. We wanted to take this further, and basically the flood network was born. We wanted to have Arduino-based ultrasonic sensor. It was using a little ISM radio module. We had Raspberry Pi as a gateway, which was feeding its data into the back-end database. And we wanted to build some web front-end mapping and that. So these were all the early things, the ideas that we wanted to continue. I should have remembered the order of these slides. But basically, two guys that are the main drivers in the team, myself and Ben Ward, who actually lives in Oxford. I don't live in Oxford myself. I just live down in West Berkshire. So I go up and see Ben, and we do bits and pieces on it, and he's doing his bits, I'm doing my sensor bits. So what we'd come up with is taking that first sensor, put it into a box, and actually stick it under a bridge. And so this was the early field trials, and it was there measuring the distance to this particular river. And during the floods last year, this river had risen to about a couple of feet within that, a couple of feet from that sensor. When we went there later in the year, it was a lot lower. So you could see that the level of the water changing on this particular section. From the first sensor, we decided to build a custom PCB. If you're here at my first attempt at doing a talk at one of these Geek nights, I was talking about designing PCBs. So this is continuing on from that. It was a small PCB in a case with a 3D printed trumpet to help weatherproof the sensor. It was okay, it worked. It did its thing. The enclosure wasn't all that waterproof. So we put this under the bridge, do some more field trials for it. It was working. So this is actually a different sensor. It's as a single transmitter, receiver, transducer, whereas the previous one was two separate, a transmitter, receiver, sensor. It was doing the job. It worked. Had a high capacity battery, and it would have lasted there hopefully for a couple of years. But we lost the test site because the guy in this flat moved out. But so it was like the closest. You've got to find people who have property on the river so you can actually tap into their broadband and that. But in the meantime, what we've been doing is entering this into competitions. There was one run by iHub, which was partly funded by the Technology Strategy Board. I think now they're called Innovate UK. But the final was at the House of Lords. I can't remember how many were actually there being showcased. And it actually won the first prize. So we had to go and collect a load of goodies there. So there's prizes, all sorts of things. And what we ended up doing with a lot of those prizes, or some of those prizes, is actually giving them back at a later hack day as prizes to say, here guys, you helped us start up, we're giving you something back as prizes for you to help encourage you. So Continuing on from that, we've been on to other showcases and events. There's an Internet of Things showcase in London. We set up a display, had a sensor mounted in the ceiling, and we could just wave our hands around and you could see the LEDs lighting up to simulate river depths. Next thing, we were looking at a different sensor because the first sensor we were using wasn't very good. It was okay indoors because it was an indoor-based sensor, but it wasn't very weatherproof, so it could be affected by things like insects crawling into it, bugs, not firmware bugs, humidity as well, which affects it. So this was the next version where we're in a more substantial case and a bigger sensor. And this one's been quite successful so far. There's a couple of pictures of the actual making them. We had a bunch of these we were making up in my shed, drilling holes for the sensors, building up PCBs. One of the things to do with these is that building these, they're not cheap. There's something like £130 parts cost for one of these units. So we've been trying to get funding for it, trying to apply to the Technology Strategy Board, now Innovate UK, for funding, didn't get that. What we have actually now got is funding from Nominet, the domain name registry people. And so far they've bought 10 of these sensors. Because they're based in Oxford, it's going in a part of another trial in Oxford. And they're starting to be installed. There's actually one being installed today. Saw pictures of that. And what this is now part of is this thing called the TV white space. It's where all your analog TV signals have now gone. There's gaps in the radio spectrum. So what they're doing is they're doing this thing called the TV white space trials. They're doing them in Cambridge. They're doing this licensed one in Oxford run by Ben Ward and his company Lovehertz with Nominet. And Nominet are actually buying the equipment for this. And what they were saying was, we can put all this network together, but we want some application to run on this network. And the application is the flood network, and there's a couple of other sort of sensor networks they're looking at as well. And this is all starting to kick off. What Nominet are doing is they're building their own back end, but what we're also doing is going to be feeding the data out to something like an MQTT broker so people can subscribe to it, pull out the data, do what they want with it themselves. What we've also done is we went to this technology event in Hebden Bridge called Wuthering Bites. I don't know if anybody went there. No? It was quite fun. We had 2 days of sort of conference talks and that, and a day of workshops. What we got is a couple of guys who'd never met before. They come along. We'd had instructions. They built some of these. And we decided to deploy one above the river. We had no idea how we were going to put one under a bridge, and this guy volunteered to actually, and you can see him there, a guy called Paolo. He volunteered to put one of these under the decking of their town hall. It wasn't until later on that we found out that he was an amateur rock climber. So he obviously had the strength to be hanging underneath this decking. I do have some shots of him. Well, all you can see is actually a boot sticking out. So we did actually have a sensor deployed there, but we brought it back with us. The latest thing is this thing called the CDE Catapult, Connected Digital Economy. It's something that's been set up by the Technology Strategy Board. They've got 7 of these catapults covering different technology areas. And they're sort of to help startups, to SMEs that want to progress their business. And what they're doing is they're setting up an opening in November, a showcase. And one of the things that's being put there is the Oxford Flood Network. There was some filming done last month, and what they've got is they've got 2 parts to it. They've got this data dome or data sphere where they're basically showing films of projects, and one of the projects is the Flood Network that's going to be featured there. And we're at the moment trying to get an invite to the opening event so we can actually see what we've been doing all this time. The future. So the first 10 sensors are actually going in the next few months. But what we're also doing is we want to work on the devices themselves. what I'm going to do, got one here. I'll tell you what, I'll start handing it round. You can actually have a look at this. I'm going to hand it round, just take the lid out. And this is one of the sensors. We'll just pass around, have a look. But what we also want to do is we want to improve things, make kits available so that people could buy their own. We want to start looking at other sensors because, excuse me, not everybody has access to a river. Some of the some of the properties that were actually flooded earlier in the year had water in their basements. They had water in their gardens, so they weren't readily accessible, and this sort of sensor wouldn't work with them. So you could have something like a float switch sensor, which would alert them that they got water in their basements or under their floors, which were the other things. What we also want to look at is other cities. We've been speaking to people in Guildford. They're going to sponsor one of those sensors so we can get more data from them. And I'm also looking at one in Newbury as well, which was quite badly flooded earlier in the year. Anybody here that thinks they can maybe help with anything? We're looking at maps, we're looking at front-end stuff. If anyone has any ideas, welcome to hear them. Things we've learnt so far. This was more geared towards sort of the hacker day thing, the hack thing. Take photos, document everything. Show people, talk to people, because people could come up with ideas. A lot of people have come up and said, why don't you use sensors from the backs of cars? They may be a cheap option. Okay, is it 12 volts? Is it 3 volts? We don't know. Can you get the consistent supply of them? What's the sort of beam pattern? Because the beam pattern on these sensors that we're looking at is sort of quite narrow, whereas back of a car it's going to be quite broad because it's looking for obstacles. Those sort of things we're looking at. People have suggested, why don't you power these by solar power? Or if it's under a bridge, where's the solar panel going to go? Some of these things sort of takes a little bit of thinking, got to work through it. Also, one of the things we have learnt is you can build these things, they can work nicely on your desk. Go and stick it outdoors, stick it under a bridge. Does it work as well there? And the other thing we did find out is they do make waterproof sensors for a reason. And just generally have fun, enjoy what you're doing. A few links, credits, people who've helped, supplied equipment, done various things on the project. Ben's partner in this, Susac, they were the ones that we started with. Sisico supplies the radios. Ragworm, using them for doing the PCBs in low volumes. The website of the Flood Network, Love Hurts, Google Groups, and myself, Thing Innovations. Thank you guys.